You can actually have amazing success with either low carb or low fat, and we have studies that compare very low carb and very low fat, and you have equal outcomes in reversing insulin resistance. So then it comes down to, for me, it's definitely the low carb side, because carbs are kind of new.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This podcast is brought to you by HitUni.com. HitUni are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carson, and trainer Drew Bay. It was founded by my friend, author, and longtime personal trainer Simon Shawcross. Simon has 15 years' experience training clients and has supervised over 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skylar Tanner, Dr. James Steele, and Dr. Ellington Darden, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high-intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, and the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organized into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention that there is a DIY course. So this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high-intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regimen. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's hituni.com, and enter the coupon code CW10. That's CW and the number 10. So again, that's hituni.com, pick your course, and enter the coupon code CW10. Thank you for your support. Hi ladies and gents, I'm Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior. This podcast is my mission to understand how to better optimize productivity in health, career, business, and lifestyle. My guests include health and fitness giants, underground, rarely interviewed exercise experts, high-intensity training specialists, former athletes, scientists, New York Times best-selling authors, startup founders, life hackers, finance experts, and many, many more. My next guest is the founder of BurnFatNotSugar.com, Ted Naiman. Ted is a board-certified family medicine physician who has devoted much of his time to the study of diet and exercise and their relationship to health. He has used his diet and exercise techniques to treat thousands of patients and has seen miraculous health transformations and amazing weight loss. A few of you listening told me about Ted's work some time ago, and after seeing his stuff on Twitter, I was intrigued and I soon devoured his website content and YouTube videos. Ted provides a rigorous scientific view on diet, and his presentation called Insulin Resistance at the Low Carb Breckenridge has gone wild, and it's amazing, and it will be in the show notes. Ted walks the walk. He is in extremely good shape by following his own dietary advice and bodyweight resistance training program. In this interview, we cover the evolution of Ted's career and driving force behind BurnFatNotSugar.com, his thoughts on how to adhere to his dietary guidelines if you're vegetarian, and his position on starches and legumes. We talk about how problematic it is to consume excess fat and how this may play a role when people are struggling to lose body fat doing a high-fat, low-carb protocol. We talk about supplements and junk food and how to deal with social situations where junk food is often abundant. Ted runs through his current resistance training exercise program and shares his thoughts on adequate exercise volume and optimizing muscular hypertrophy for the individual, and much, much more. For all of the show notes and links for this episode and all episodes, please go to 15, that's 15, minutescorporatewarrior.com/podcast. I'm really proud of this one, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy this conversation. I've read much of Ted's work and listened to a number of his interviews, and I'm confident that there is plenty of unique content here. So without further ado, please enjoy this podcast with Ted Naiman. Ted, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Welcome to Corporate Warrior. Appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
You are most welcome. So as we were saying just now, I'd really appreciate, I wanted the audience and myself to learn a little bit more about you. I've not heard you talk at length about your background, and just be interested in a brief summary of what, firstly what your background is, and then what inspired you to become a doctor and embark on your health and fitness mission.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, actually, my background is mechanical engineering. I got a mechanical engineering degree, and I really wanted to work for the aerospace industry. And a lot of mechanical engineers at my school got hired at Boeing building planes. And it just so happened that the year I got out of school with my engineering degree, Boeing laid off about 1,000 engineers or something horrible like that, and nobody could get a job. So I just could not get a job, and I could either become a barista or flip burgers. And I just figured, you know what, this is depressing. I'll never get a job. I'm going back to school. And I just picked medical school kind of at random on a whim. I never wanted to be a doctor. That was not my career path. So just kind of at the very last possible minute, I think at the last day you possibly could, I applied to medical school and got in. And now I find myself as a doctor. That wasn't really the master plan.
So go on, yeah. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, and you wanted to know how I got started with the health and fitness thing. So I've got a story there. Basically, I was raised vegetarian, and I went to medical school at Loma Linda University. Have you heard of Loma Linda?
I haven't.
It's this famous blue zone. Loma Linda is famous for being this blue zone Adventist mecca of vegetarianism, where everyone is focused on diet and health, and everyone's a vegetarian, and they have a lot of longevity there. And I grew up vegetarian, and I went to Loma Linda. And, on paper, my diet was spectacular. It was just like, whole grains and low fat and lots of veggies and just no meat or eggs or butter. This was all saturated fat. So on paper, I had the healthiest diet you could possibly imagine. And you know what? It didn't do anything for me. I felt like crap. I looked like crap. My body composition was horrible. Everyone around me was kind of in the same boat. And what that basically taught me is that diet doesn't matter, right? So like here you are eating what on paper is the best diet on the planet, right? Lots of legumes and whole grains and veggies and no saturated fat or cholesterol at all. And, my health sucked, my body composition sucked. And I realized, diet doesn't matter, because I'm no healthier than the people around me who just eat, fast food. There's really no difference. So I came out of med school thinking, diet is not a big deal, doesn't really matter. And then I went to residency. And in residency, and also in medical school, what they really teach you is that all chronic disease comes from bad genetics, right? Yeah, they taught us that if your parents are diabetic, you're going to be diabetic. If your parents are fat, you're going to be fat. If your parents did something bad, it's just bad luck. It's just bad genetic lottery, And we had this idea that some people just had poor protoplasm because they had bad genetics, and nothing you could do could make them any healthier. And we should just feel sorry for them, right? This is kind of how it was. And so I did my residency in South Carolina. And I don't know, do you know where that's at? It's basically in the deep South here in the United States. And at the time, it was the number1 state in the country for anything bad you could think of: obesity, poverty, toothlessness, basically heart attacks, strokes, any chronic disease you could think of, diabetes, of course, it was #1. And so I just saw tons of pathology. Just people were sick and dying and getting amputations and going blind and having kidney failure and just every chronic disease from insulin resistance that you could think of. And here I am, in order to protect ourselves from feeling bad as failures, as doctors, what we would kind of tell ourselves is that, oh, well, this person just has bad genetics. Their parents are overweight, their parents are diabetic, they're overweight and diabetic. It's unavoidable. This is just what happens. And so here I am thinking, diet doesn't matter. My diet was great and I look like crap. And then all these people around me just have bad genetics, and I should feel sorry for them because no matter what I do for them as a doctor, they're just going to get diabetes and they're going to get an amputation, they're going to have a heart attack, and then they're going to have a stroke, and then they're going to die. And I was basically feeling like, all this chronic disease was inevitable. And then one day I'm there in the clinic and this guy comes in and I'm like, how's your diabetes? And I'm expecting to hear, well, it's worse. And, I need a higher dose of insulin, or I need more medications, or, now, I'm having more complications. But instead, this guy was like, oh, I feel great. I lost 30 pounds. I stopped all my meds. I feel spectacular. I don't even think I need to come in here anymore. And I was like, what? It just blew me away. I couldn't believe it. I was like, what did you do? How did you manage to reverse your diabetes? Your labs look great. And this guy, well, he pulls out a copy of this paperback book. It's like Dr. Atkins' New Diet Revolution, right? And he's like, well, I just stopped eating, carbs, and I just eat, meat and green veggies, and I just lost a ton of weight. I feel awesome. His diabetes was reversed, and I was completely blown away. I mean, that was like this was 20 years ago, and this was the first clue I had that diet could actually make any difference at all. And this was not what I was taught. I'd never learned anything about this. And so I just started to research it. I was fascinated. I was like, oh my God, you can actually reverse these sorts of health conditions with diet. And so I started researching basically anything I could get a hold of involving diet and health. And honestly, I've been doing that for the past 20 years. And so where I've arrived at right now is basically 20 years of research and on diet and health, and just watching an endless stream of patients come in and out of the office. What are they eating? What are they doing? What do they look like? What are their numbers? What are their outcomes? And, I've just gotten so much information from my patients. And it all really started with this first guy who kind of opened my eyes to, the importance of diet and health. And then for me, the difference between the very, very healthiest person who walks in my clinic and the very, very sickest, most chronic disease-ridden person, really the only differences between them are just diet and exercise. If you break it down, it's really just pure lifestyle. And so now I've gone from this belief that diet didn't really matter to thinking that diet is, the most important factor of all when it comes to human health.
That's a really cool story, and interesting how you kind of came to know about how important diet and exercise are. So what then made you think, what, I'm going to create this website and publish all this content? Like, what made you suddenly decide to do that rather than be just a great doctor who's giving great advice to people and helping them reach their optimal health?
Oh, well, basically, I got tired of telling people the same thing over and over again. And I'm pretty lazy, so I just kind of did that to just help myself out.
Well, okay, so that then just became a reference that you just gave patients in the future. So would you just direct them to the website? Yeah.
Right. I'm just lazy. No,
it's clever, right? You're just automating things, and you're being more efficient, aren't you? So similar, I eat a very similar diet to you, based on your diet YouTube video, which is on your website, which I'll put in the show notes. Really good. So I eat, quite high animal product diet with lots of green vegetables and healthy fats and things like that, and fairly low carb. My girlfriend, though, is vegetarian. And she's chosen to be vegetarian for ethical reasons and has been for, close on 20 years. And I appreciate that, in your opinion, being a vegetarian maybe a suboptimal way to eat based on your experience. But the good thing is that she does eat a lot of eggs, avocados, nuts, and plenty of veggies. And I wondered if you're eating, making sure you're eating plenty of those foods and you're not eating refined carbohydrate as much, are you really missing anything? I mean, I appreciate you might not be getting some of the vitamins and nutrients that you get from red meat, but is it really a huge deal, I suppose?
Oh, okay. So if you're a vegetarian but you eat eggs and dairy or maybe some other animal products, you're going to be fine. And I've seen plenty of vegetarians in absolutely perfect health with a really well-designed diet like that. I think that strict veganism or raw veganism is just a minefield, though. It can go so wrong. So I see the whole spectrum of people on plant-based. I see people who, like your girlfriend, who are eating eggs and dairy, and they're eating, just a whole foods plant-based diet, and they're perfectly healthy. Everything's great. You can definitely pull that off. I think there's nothing wrong with that. It's a little more work, and you have to be smarter. And it makes me nervous because a lot of people aren't smart. But if you're smart, you can completely pull that off.
Good. No, that's a good answer. So, and just in addition to that, what is your thoughts on, obviously legumes are kind of normally sit in the grey area. Obviously Tim Ferriss made them fairly popular in his slow carb diet, and I think the whole claim was that because they have fibre in, the net carbs is less, and therefore they don't maybe elevate insulin as much. But is that, what are your thoughts on legumes? Do they have a place in someone's diet, or should they be avoided?
Oh, well, I am not afraid of legumes, and personally, I will actually eat some chickpeas, some hummus, maybe some lentils, some peanuts. I don't think these are bad or should be forbidden. I don't have any completely religious paleo aversion to them. I do think that if you look at the nutrient density, and you are trying to avoid carbohydrate, there's probably better foods out there, but I don't think there's anything wrong with eating some legumes. I mean, I wouldn't make refried pinto beans the base of my food pyramid, for example, but I think having some legumes in there's nothing wrong with that.
Good stuff. So just on the topic of nutritional density, I don't know if you did you ever watch the YouTube talk by Dr. Matt Lalonde regarding nutritional density? Have you seen that?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I have. I love Matt Lalonde. I want him to make some more videos, actually. Yeah,
I agree. I wish he would put more stuff out because he seems like an incredibly intelligent and thorough scientist.
Right.
But what confused me personally, and perhaps others, is he did this nutritional density study, and from memory, I believe starches, including tubers, were quite nutritional dense in his analysis. And it's my understanding that he actually eats tubers in several of his meals every single day. And that seems to somewhat contradict, I guess, some of your recommendations. And in that, you kind of say to avoid or very much moderate those types of foods. So what are your thoughts on that? And why might Matt suggest that? Because it's just, for me, quite confusing, because I think you're both obviously very intelligent people and with a very honest approach, and it's just sometimes very confusing to know what we should be eating, I suppose.
Right. So I'm actually not afraid of tubers at all. I think that if you actually look at like a boiled potato, the bioavailable glucose from the carbs in that is not that high. It's really not too bad, and there is a fair amount of protein in there, and you can literally live off of nothing but potatoes because there's adequate protein and nutrient density, and potatoes are non-terrible. I mean, I personally do eat tubers. I eat jicama, I eat carrots, I eat I think the problem is when we've done so much artificial selection when it comes to potatoes, right? So a native heirloom potato is this little tiny golf ball sized thing, and it's got a very high nutrient density. But then we've artificially selected for a plant that makes a ginormous potato the size of your frigging head, and we have not improved the nutrient density. We've just improved the starch yield, right? So the potato stores just basically energy there, and we've artificially selected for a potato the size of your head that stores the maximum amount of energy density with the lower nutrient density. And then we've turned this ginormous potato into the #1 vegetable in America, and we're not doing so good over here. I don't know if you've noticed. So like some small heirloom potatoes, this is awesome. This is actually pretty low in carb. This is pretty high in nutrient density. You could eat those pretty much all you want. These are also cellular carbs, so they're way less damaging. You're getting the whole cell wall. You're getting a ton of nutrients. I have nothing wrong with an heirloom potato. What I have a problem with is a artificially selected mega potato at McDonald's that's turned into the #1 vegetable in America.
Okay. Yeah, that I appreciate. So it's about selecting the right types, I suppose. And is that why in your diet video, and I appreciate, whenever you put out content, you can't obviously keep it perfectly up to date. So you put something out and maybe you think, oh, maybe I would have said that differently. But do you say, stay away from, I can't remember if you say exactly stay away from potatoes, but to make it simple, so to give people kind of broad guidelines, is that why you would say something like that, sort of steer away from potatoes, rice, whole grains? Whole grains probably, well, they're obviously quite bad for you, but like rice and potatoes, for instance.
Oh, right. So all of this is on a big spectrum, like you could eat some wild rice. The nutrient density is really, really high. But if you just try to eat, 10 bowls of sticky rice a day, you're going to turn into a sumo wrestler. You know what I mean? It's like, so everything's on this spectrum. The answer is always somewhere in between with everything. So, a little bit of wild rice, awesome. 50 pounds of white rice is the base of your food pyramid. Okay, now you're #1 diabetes prevalence in the world, like China and India. So, potato, you have some tiny heirloom, high nutrient density tubers. This is probably an awesome, great food for humans. But, you just buy a giant bag of potato chips. This is not so great. It's like there's this huge spectrum, but it's so nuanced that it's hard to summarize that and really dumb it down. You know what I mean?
I do. That's a good answer. Okay, so just wanted to touch on your insulin resistance talk. One of the things you mentioned in the talk, which was fantastic, by the way, and I'm really pleased that it seems to be shared everywhere. And one of the things you said was how chronic, and I'm butchering this a little bit and paraphrasing, but you said how chronic high glucose exposure can cause glycation of end products, which can lead to many neurodegenerative diseases. And you mentioned that some of the damage is permanent. And I was wondering, does that mean if you ate poorly for a long time, or say for maybe 10 years, and then you switched, so you moved on to a low carb, high fat diet, you started making those positive lifestyle changes, could you not undo that damage that you've done?
Oh yeah, you can definitely reverse a lot of this damage. So I will see diabetics who have diabetic neuropathy, nephropathy, retinopathy, and there's always a certain percent that's reversible and a certain percent that's permanent. Maybe you can reverse 95% of your neuropathy, but 5% is still there. Or maybe it's the other way around. You've been such a horrible diabetic for so long, you can only reverse 10% of it and the rest of it is permanent. But the answer, again, is always somewhere in the middle. A certain percent is reversible and a certain percent is not. And that's what we see with all diabetic complications.
Okay, cool. So you've got this very popular hangry diagram on Twitter, which is very, very informative. Today I was looking through some of the responses and comments on that diagram. Someone referenced work from Stefan Gayanet. I don't even know if that's how you say his name, but that's how I read it, who reported a study that he believes shows no increase in hunger following a post-meal glucose crash. And obviously that in some way, from what I'm looking at, contradicts your diagram. So I wonder, what are your thoughts on that, and how, again, I'm confused.
Right. So, to be perfectly honest, everyone on Earth can tell you what this hangry sensation is. But if you actually measure people's blood sugar at that time, it might not be that low. So I think my diagram is far too simplistic and really dumbed down and probably not entirely correct. And I think what you're really seeing with hangry is people's inability to meet their metabolic needs at that moment from stored body fat or energy in their body, because they shut down fat oxidation so hard in their mitochondria with their glucose. So you take someone who's fairly glucose dependent, they're not really good at meeting their metabolic needs with just stored body fat, so they're hungry frequently. They eat this food, their blood sugar and insulin goes way up. They really shut down lipolysis, they really shut down fat oxidation at a mitochondrial and a cellular level. And then, an hour later, they're just starving and they feel like they're going to die if they don't eat. If you test their blood sugar at that time, it's not super low. And that's why a lot of doctors and a lot of researchers will say, oh, hypoglycemia isn't even real. I mean, if you measure their blood sugar at this time, it's still technically in the normal range. It's 70 or something. It's not technically low. But I think what you're not seeing is this person's inability to meet their metabolic needs at that moment with the fuel that's in their body already. And that is way too complicated. I mean, we can't even measure that with existing technology. There's no way I can put that in a simple little infographic and get a bunch of likes and shares, So I'm trying to dumb it down. And in a way, my diagram is probably, just fraudulently wrong. Let's be honest. So I don't have a problem with anyone who wants to criticize it, because I am kind of exaggerating to make a point. But the point I'm making is very real, and everyone on Earth can tell you they've experienced hangry. I mean, this is just a thing.
Absolutely, and I get it now. It's just annoying people like me who really want to get into the detail that don't just see it for what it is, but I can see how it can be incredibly useful heuristic for people to follow. No, that's fine. Okay.
I do want to say, though, that I feel that a lot of low-carb people kind of cure their hangry. And I think that's worth noting. I mean, I think that's worth thinking about. And, it's hard to explain exactly what's going on there, but it's certainly an ability to meet your metabolic needs with what's in your body without having to eat all the time. You know what I mean?
So if you're well adapted to low carb, high fat, let's say, and I've experienced this, so I might have very, very, very occasionally, let's say, a big McDonald's meal, right? And I'm pretty full. Like, I don't think I have that feeling of hangry come up for me, but maybe that's because of my insulin sensitivity. I'm so similar to you. I'm lean naturally, right? I assume you're part of that 1/3, I imagine, of those more insulin sensitive people, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah, mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I guess, is that what you're kind of saying? So if you're well adapted to something like a low carb, high fat diet, you might not have that response, even if you do, your glucose does crash.
Right.
Okay. And in summary, just going back to what you were saying about the hangry diagram, is you obviously kept it really high level deliberately, but the truth is that it's a multifactorial thing, right? There's so many variables in play, but to try and diagram that would be probably quite challenging.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay, good stuff. So I don't know if you've listened to it yet. Have you managed to listen to Art Devaney's podcast with Tim Ferriss? I'm actually only halfway through it. I need to listen to the rest. The sound quality I think he's working on, but very informative and very interesting. And one of the things that Art said is he thought that too much fat can cause fatty liver, and he thinks that some of these high fat, low carb advocates are eating too much fat. And he also said that excess fat prevents stem cells from doing their job, and that we should be careful about how much fat we eat. And I know you've talked about, you find people who eat high fat, low carb and don't get results typically are drinking or adding fat. What's your thoughts about all of this? Do you think, how do we avoid, if it's true, how do we avoid eating so much fat?
Right. Okay. So if you're overweight and insulin resistant, you really have way too much fat in your adipocytes, and you have trouble keeping that fat in your adipocytes. And this fat coming back out of your adipocytes is part of the driver for chronic hyperinsulinemia. So your insulin level's always high because your body's trying to keep your fat shoved in your adipocytes, and it's constantly coming back out again. If you're insulin resistant, overweight, you have too much fat in your adipocytes, you have too much ectopic fat, you might not want to be eating more fat at that point. I think what's really going on is you've stored all the fat you've eaten because you're never burning it. And possibly the reason you're never burning fat is because there's always exogenous glucose coming in. So you're eating all this glucose all the time. It has a much higher macronutrient priority. You shove all the fat you ingest into your fat cells, where it may or may not be burned later, depending on how much glucose is coming in, and then you're insulin resistant. So I kind of agree with him in that if you need to get rid of fat, you don't want to be eating a ton of added extra fat. And I think that we know that the fastest way to lose weight in pretty much anyone is to be low carb and low fat at the exact same time. I mean, this is what every bodybuilder and fitness model and aesthetic athlete is basically doing. They're targeting protein, they're restricting carbs and fat. And this is, I agree with him, and I think that I differ a little from the usual low-carb crowd in that I don't think eating unlimited fat is a good idea, and I actually think that if you have too much fat in your body, you might not want to eat a lot of extra added fat at all.
Okay. Would you then, so if you did kind of follow that more fitness model bodybuilder approach where it's like low fat, low carb, high protein perhaps, or moderate protein, would you then wait until your body composition improved to a healthy level and then perhaps move to the moderate protein, high fat, low carb potentially? Is that how you could manage that?
Absolutely. So let's say you're morbidly obese and you're insulin resistant and you have way too much fat. If you target protein, restrict carbs and fats, internally you slip into this ketogenic diet where you're just burning stored body fat for most of your energy needs. And your diet, even if you eat no fat at all, you could just eat a boneless, skinless chicken breast and some green veggies, and you will be on a ketogenic diet. You'll be burning mostly fat for energy at a cellular and mitochondrial level, and you will lose weight rapidly. And then as you lose weight, you can't keep eating just this protein and greens forever. You have to add something back in. And my advice to most people is to keep the carbs low, add back in more fat. So the less body fat you have, the more dietary fat you're going to want to add back in.
Cool. I was just curious, with your patients, those that come in that are very over fat, and you recommend that type of start to their dieting journey, so the low carb, low fat, moderate to high protein, what rate of fat loss do you see on average? I mean, if they stick to it, because I imagine a lot of them don't. But when they do, what sort of rate of fat loss do you see?
All right. About the fastest I ever see from people losing just pure fat is 2.5 pounds a week. So you could lose about 10 pounds a month of just pure fat if you're on a really well-designed diet. If you're not exercising yet, you're just using diet, you're targeting protein, restricting carbs, not eating a ton of added extra fat, you're going to see people losing, anywhere from 1 to 2.5 pounds a week of just fat, typically without too much in the way of lean mass loss.
Wow. Okay. So would you measure that with like a bod pod or a DEXA or something?
Well, I don't actually subject a lot of people to that kind of measurement because
Cool.
typically it's expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. You typically go for the height to waist ratio. Is that still your
right
measure that you do turn to for tracking that type of stuff?
Exactly. I like waist to height ratio. And I do some skin fold thickness testing occasionally, but waist to height is my favorite.
Cool. So, got some questions from listeners. I'm not going to read out all their names because I've accidentally deleted them. So they might be a bit mad at me about that. But I do remember this one being from Skylar because it's really complicated and I hope you understand it. And if you don't, we'll move on. So, he asks, can you go into more detail about how ketones aren't simply macronutrient specific in the context of your diet, but also calorie mediated?
Well, I think what he's implying there, I think this is a dig at exogenous ketones, right? So a lot of people now are buying and consuming exogenous ketones, which is honestly, this is just dumb, right? This makes no sense at all. So if I wanted to be in ketosis, I could drink a gallon of exogenous ketones, and that will literally shut off burning of any stored body fat until all those ketones are completely gone. So ketones actually raise insulin, shut off lipolysis, shut off fat oxidation. This is the feedback system that keeps you and I from going into ketoacidosis when we're fasting, right? So I'll have a little bit of ketones present, but then insulin goes up slightly to shut that down. This is why type 1 diabetics who have no insulin just start making ketones out of control, and next thing you know, they're in ketoacidosis.
Right.
Well, you drink exogenous ketones, it's going to raise insulin, it's a feedback system, it works perfectly. You will not burn any stored body fat until all of that is gone. So to me, it's just like a huge waste of time and money. I mean, it's completely senseless. The only person who could possibly benefit from exogenous ketones is, someone with a very brittle neurological condition like seizure disorder or a brain tumor or something, or maybe someone who's just trying to eke out a little bit more performance in a fat adapted state. But it's really basically pointless. And, I cringe at the marketing of exogenous ketones at the moment. It's really embarrassing.
Is that because it just doesn't really line up with the literature from what you're saying?
Yeah, it's just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, like, the best way to be in ketosis is to just restrict carbs. If you are not eating enough carbohydrate to replenish your glycogen, you will enter ketosis, and that is the way you want to do it. And so trying to eat a ton of extra fat to be in more ketosis is ridiculous. I could eat 5 pounds of coconut oil right now, and I would be in the deepest, darkest ketosis you've ever seen, and I'd also gain 3 pounds. I mean, it would really be pointless. I could also swill a bunch of exogenous ketones, and I would just absolutely be guaranteed to not burn any stored body fat for hours. It's just not the way to do it.
Some people claim there's a cognitive benefit to taking exogenous ketones, or you've got things like bulletproof coffee, which are quite popular. So do you just think it's still a waste of money, that it's pointless, that you're better off just fasting or eating low carb?
I personally would love to see everyone take any money they're going to spend on exogenous ketones and spend that on some high quality actual food. Buy some pastured eggs, buy some wild caught salmon. Please, I think you would be better off. Now, I will say that if you're at your goal body composition and you're nice and thin, then sure, you could probably drink butter or coconut oil and it wouldn't do anything bad to you. But I'm not sure that it's value added.
Got it. Cool. Good. Okay, so another question from someone on Twitter, this one. They ask, what do you think of Dr. Rosedale's 0.5 grams / kilogram of protein to avoid cancer? This is on the Low Carb BREC conference, and I'm hoping you're familiar with that.
Oh, right. Yeah, I was right next to him when he said that. So the idea here is that you restrict the hell out of protein so that you never have any mTOR signaling, and you, unfortunately, we haven't really proven this, and I'm not sure that it's going to be worth it to massively restrict protein your whole life, possibly risking sarcopenia, osteopenia, and other conditions, only to find out that your lifespan goes up by, a day and a half. And then I'm much more worried about health span. You know what I mean? So lifespan, honestly, who cares about lifespan? People live a long time. My patients are 80, 90, 100, but they've had chronic disease for 50 years. I mean, they've got Alzheimer's. They're in a wheelchair. Their whole body is just crumbling. They have just ridiculous sarcopenia, osteopenia, brain shrinkage, chronic diseases up one side and down the other, and they're still living a long-ass time. So to me, it's not at all about longevity. It's about health span. And in order to have health span, you want to be as strong as you possibly can. You want the highest lean mass you can get. Life is short. Live it lean, strong, healthy. And I think that we have enough data on strength and longevity and muscle mass and longevity to support the fact that that your health span and lifespan are both going to be higher if you have lean mass. And when I look at people who are restricting protein, they don't seem to have the body composition that I want to have, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So they tend to be less muscle mass and...
Yeah, we also, we know what protein restriction buys you. That's called old people, right? So we have studies on what elderly people actually eat. The ABC study on American adults age 70 to 79, they're eating 38 grams of animal protein a day and 247 grams of carbs a day. Wow. Yeah, and then like 68 grams of fat. So we know what happens when you restrict protein. I mean, and it's not pretty.
I think I should have asked the question properly. I think I missed out the bit that says, I mean, you were obviously at the conference, which was that the recommendation would be 0.5 kilograms of protein per pound of body weight. Is that correct? If that was, because I missed out the body weight piece of that sentence.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, personally, I think that's too low.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Okay, so I think we've answered this in a way already, but maybe you've got something to add. But again, someone on Twitter, she is on low carb, high fat, and can't lose weight. And she said her fasting blood glucose is high. Why is this, and what are your recommendations?
So if you're continuously eating fat, you're going to have, and you're diabetic or have impaired fasting glucose, you're going to have higher blood sugars, when you wake up in the morning. And it's basically all this fat spewing back out of the adipocytes that hits the liver and drives gluconeogenesis. So your liver is literally pumping out more glucose because of all the energy substrates that's hitting it that you can't shove into your adipocytes. So the very, 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 very fastest way to lower your blood sugar is to be low carb and low fat at the same time. You know what I mean? So this person, it sounds crazy, but you basically want to eat mostly protein. You want to target protein and restrict carbs and fats at the same time. Your blood sugar will go down.
Good stuff. Okay. Okay. So when a new patient sees you and learns what low fat, low carb entails, what are the chances that person doesn't return?
Oh, well, unfortunately, it's carbs are delicious and junk food is awesome. And honestly, a lot of a lot of people can't pull it off, and so I can't give you an actual statistic, but certainly there's plenty of people. There's tons of people who know what they should or shouldn't do, and don't do it anyway. I don't really have a lot of control over that, unfortunately.
That's the issue. Okay, cool. So let's just talk about, you've talked about your diet a little bit already, but I would like to just understand, like, what does an average day for Ted look like? Breakfast, lunch, dinner, or, well, it might only be 2 meals a day, but can you just give us a snapshot of an average day for you?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. So, my diet is pretty much just steak and eggs. I do intermittent fasting. I do a sort of a 16-8 intermittent fast most days. So breakfast is just, coffee, black coffee. Lunch is usually a giant pile of meat, maybe some green veggies, maybe some eggs. Dinner is pretty much the same thing. It's like a piece of meat, some sort of green vegetable. Basically a lot of meat, a lot of eggs, some green veggies, some low sugar fruit. That's about it.
Cool. And just for those listening, 16-8 intermittent fasting means 16 hours without food, so 16 hours fasting, and then eating in an 8-hour window. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Okay. Do you ever eat any junk food? Do you ever, do you ever partake in that, or are you completely teetotal and eat well all the time?
Oh, no, I definitely eat junk food, but I try to be a little bit mindful about it. I let these cheats come to me mostly in the form of social occasions. I'm going out, there's going to be some good food there. And honestly, frequently I will plan for that sort of thing. I maybe will do a little bit of extra fasting or an extra workout. I'll go into it with even lower liver and muscle glycogen. And then honestly, I could get away with cheating like that with some regularity, no problems. It's but you have to be mindful about it. I'm not just going to eat a bunch of crap just because it's there. I'm not going to sit down and eat a whole box of donuts, just because I'm bored and it's right next to me. It's mindful. It's occasional. I'm doing it intentionally, that sort of thing.
So you're very strategic about it, from what it sounds
strategic.
Like.
That's a good word.
No, it's that makes sense, and that's similar to, I guess, how I look at it. So what you might time a high intensity training style workout prior to a dinner date with friends or something like that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. Is there any supplements that you take regularly, or that you cycle on and off of at all?
No, not at all. And honestly, I'm pretty strongly anti-supplement. I really think that the main point of most supplements is to make money for whoever manufactured that supplement. And I would always like my patients to take all the money they'd spend on supplements and go buy some pastured eggs and some wild-caught salmon and some, high-quality animal protein and eat the hell out of that instead. They're gonna be way better off.
Really? So you don't advocate any supplements whatsoever? No cod liver oil, omega-3? You just think it's just whole food is the answer?
I never take any supplements. I do think there are exceptions, for a patient who never eats fish, they might benefit from taking some fish oil. If you live at a really high or low latitude and you never get any sun, you might benefit from vitamin D. But for the most part, supplements are, we did not become the dominant species on Earth because we had supplements. I mean, I just think supplements are a joke, 99%. I really do. It's
interesting because I used to live in London, and, London doesn't get a great deal of sunlight, or at least, sunny weather. And I was working indoors in an office, so I figured, I must have pretty low vitamin D. And then I got one of these blood tests done, and my level was like 85 millimolars or something like that, which is fairly decent, right?
Wow. Yeah.
and I hadn't been doing any supplementation. So I messaged a friend of mine who knows a bit more about this than me, and I said, is it even worth me supplementing? Like, because obviously there's normal and then there's optimal, right? And I wondered whether or not there's any value in me being optimal, or whether I just leave it alone. Unless the level drops significantly. What would be your recommendation on something like that? Would you just say, keep going as you are without the supplement?
Oh, I would definitely leave it alone. And the other thing about vitamin D is we know that low vitamin D is associated with every bad thing you can think of. I mean, low vitamin D is associated with obesity, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune disease, you name it. But what we haven't proven is that taking a vitamin D pill will prevent or reverse any of that crap. So what really happens is low vitamin D is a sign from God that your health sucks somehow and that you're missing something. You know what I mean? It could even be, UV light on the skin probably makes a dozen other phytonutrients that we haven't even identified yet, or maybe it means that you just need to go outside more. It's just associated. So taking this vitamin D pill is probably doing nothing for you personally. I would definitely not bother, especially if you had a reasonably good blood level.
God, I'm wasting all my money.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. That's really useful to know. Okay, cool. So I'm going to move on to some sort of general health questions and then some stuff about resistance training. This is a really random question out of left field, which was posted on Facebook by a friend of mine. And he asks, what is your perspective on vaccination for babies?
Oh, right. Well, I am pro-vaccination. I do recommend vaccines. My child is vaccinated. She has vaccines. I think vaccines are good. And I'll tell you what, I mean, as a physician, 20 years of medical experience, I watched kids die of chickenpox encephalitis. I mean, I've watched kids die of meningitis. I've seen people with polio and post-polio syndrome. Some of this stuff is just bad. And so vaccines is probably one of the few things Western medicine has done that's been, actually really good. You know what I'm saying? I don't believe that vaccines cause autism. I don't think we have any proof that vaccines do anything really bad. And I have plenty of proof that the diseases they prevent do bad things. So you don't have to watch too many kids die of this stuff to start thinking, oh, hey, maybe this vaccine is pretty cool. You know what I mean?
So I guess I'm quite ignorant on this topic. I don't know too much about it, but is there do you often hear the argument that, oh, well, if they're eating correctly and they're raised properly and have healthy parents, that they wouldn't need vaccines? Or do you ever get those types of arguments? Oh,
yeah, but I think that's crap. Some of these viruses are extremely virulent. I mean, if you're exposed to chickenpox and you're not immune, you're going to get it. And then, 5% of kids will get pneumonia or encephalitis, and a certain percent are just going to straight up die from this, no matter how healthy they are at baseline. So I think that's I don't buy that. That's ridiculous, I think.
How many kids do you have?
Oh, just one. I have a 10-year-old daughter.
Oh, okay, cool. And another random question within the sort of general health questions I have here. This is something that someone asked me a long time ago, and I wrote it down. I thought, I want to ask someone this, but I never really felt like I had the right guest, and hopefully you'll be the right guest. But you may not have a good answer. And they asked me, does nicotine consumption have any negative effect on strength and hypertrophy? They're obviously someone who is involved in resistance training and wants to improve strength and muscular hypertrophy. So have you got any thoughts on that at all?
I'm not afraid of nicotine. I think nicotine is not terribly bad. There are some theories that it causes some vasoconstriction, which might be slightly less than optimal, but I don't see it as a huge problem. I would never tell someone, oh, you can't use nicotine because you're going to kill your gains. I don't think I would say something like that.
That'd be a big claim to say something like that.
Nicotine is so much better for you than smoking that I highly recommend it for anyone who's smoking. I'm like, please use nicotine vaping, patches, gum, lozenges, whatever you have to do. It's literally thousands of times safer than smoking. So please do whatever you have to do to not smoke. That's my opinion.
That's an interesting sort of vein of conversation, that, because I'd be curious, what, obviously I'm assuming you spoke to a lot of people who are addicted to smoking as patients, and what have you found to be the most, I guess, effective way to wean people off cigarettes?
Oh, well, this has actually been studied, and I agree with it completely. The most effective way to quit smoking, as a scientific fact, is multiple forms of nicotine replacement. So, like patches plus gum or vaping or lozenges. So you do want to use nicotine replacement. That is the most effective way to quit smoking.
Excellent. Okay, well, that's good to know. I've got someone in mind who I'm going to share that piece of knowledge with. Okay, so moving on to some stuff about resistance training. Really keen to learn also about your current regimen. Obviously, I've seen you've got an excellent video on your website where you demonstrate some of the bodyweight stuff that you do. And the first question I have is, I guess, from someone who probably recently listened to an episode I've done with Ryan Hall on genetics and on how different volumes of exercise work differently for different people. And he wanted to ask you, do you understand why some people purport that certain individuals supposedly respond favorably to a higher volume of training, and what the possible mechanisms of this are exactly?
Well, okay, first of all, I heard the Ryan Hall podcast, which is awesome, which is great. I love that. And, genetics is a big deal. I actually, unfortunately, I'm almost completely type 1 muscle fiber. I did the 23andMe genetic testing. I am almost totally type 1 fibers. This is depressing. This is bad. I don't want to be. I want to be a type 2. But I am so far skewed to the type 1 side, it's absolutely ridiculous. So I know for a fact that I can do a single set to failure every single day, and it will not be a bad thing. I will not lose strength. I will not go backwards. I'm not saying that every single day would be superior to, twice a week or 3 times a week, but I could get away with it, definitely. And we type 1 people could definitely train daily as long as the volume was low. The frequency could go way up, and we're not going to go backwards. It's going to be non-inferior. I could do a single set to failure daily, and it will be non-inferior to 3 times a week. And I think that there's a lot of people who think that overtraining is a little bit mythical in the resistance world. You know what I mean? I don't know if you've heard any of Menno Henselmann's thoughts on the Norwegian frequency project. These people, these powerlifters who lifted daily and didn't lose strength and didn't get worse. And I feel like as long as the volume's low, people could probably have increased frequency even in the high intensity world that would be non-inferior to, in other words, if you're training once a week, training 2 or 3 times a week, I find it hard to believe that you would actually, permanently lose strength or hypertrophy as a result.
Even if you're training to failure,
even if you're training to failure, yeah. So I'm one of these people who thinks that overtraining is kind of mythical. But then again, I'm just pure type 1, so I could be maybe doing 2 workouts a day. Who knows? Because I'm just extreme on the type 1 side, which is sad for me. I mean, let's face it, that sucks.
Ted, I think you look great, so I think you have enough to be sad about.
Well, thank you.
But just for those listening, to make sense of this, because and correct me if I'm wrong, type 1 means you're predominantly slow twitch, so slow twitch muscle fibers are slow to fatigue and recover quickly. And I guess that's why you could potentially increase your frequency significantly and not see any downside. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely right.
Right. So if you are at the other end of the spectrum, then would more frequency be detrimental then? So I'm not quite following it. I feel like that would be, if you're complete other end of the spectrum, like mostly fast twitch muscle fiber, that maybe you need less.
Well, I think it's definitely true that people on the opposite side of the spectrum from me need way less frequency. And I think that's definitely true. But at the same time, I'm not convinced that if they increase the frequency, that would be, vastly inferior. Like, I have a hard time believing that someone training 3 times a week is going to go backwards, but once a week they're going to go forward. You know what I mean? I have trouble believing that. I would believe that 3 times a week is no better than once a week, but like literally getting worse, it's hard for me to imagine that if the volumes are very low.
That's interesting.
Like single set.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've definitely. And I think a lot of people have gone through it where they've, read Body by Science, which is a fantastic book. And I think Dr. Tom McGuff is an excellent individual. But I wonder, I've always been quite, I shouldn't train too frequently, otherwise I'm going to, eat into my recovery, and almost fearful of that. And perhaps that's not true from what you're saying. Perhaps it's worth experimenting with higher frequency, so long as the volume is low-ish.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I actually think there are people in the high-intensity world who are afraid to work out because they're going to kill their gains. They're like, I have to wait. I didn't recover hard enough. I need to wait a few more days. And I think that's a little bit overhyped. I think that's a little bit overblown. I think overtraining is a little bit mythical when people are just doing single sets. Like if we took you and cloned you off and one of you lifted to single set to failure once a week and the other one every day, and then we gave both of you a really long rest period, a couple of weeks, and tested your strength, I doubt we would see a single set failure daily be inferior to once a week. I'm not saying it would be better. I'm not saying it's optimum, but I think that you don't have to be as afraid of it as people are. Like, I can't train at all today because I got to recover all day and tomorrow and the next day. I think I don't think any of us in the single set to failure world are really seriously overtraining. You know what I mean? I think that we're more worried about overtraining than we need to be.
Okay. Just so I guess go into this a little bit more, where I get slightly confused is Doug and I spoke before about volume, and you might have heard this one where sometimes a single set to failure individual might actually be doing the same volume of someone who's doing multiple sets, because actually the time under tension is the same, because even though the guy, the bro, as they call them, is in the gym for an hour and a half, he's chatting to his friends, he's taking a break, he's wasting time, whereas those doing Body by Science type protocol are completing their, they're basically they're under tension the entire time they're in the gym, pretty much. So I've lost my train of thought now because I've just talked too long about that. But basically, where I get, I guess, slightly confused is, number one, like if you're doing, say, several high-intensity training workouts a week like that, then your overall volume is actually quite high. And also, this whole analogy they use where it's like you dig a hole, you have to refill the hole, and then you have to supercompensate. And they use that to describe muscle fatigue and then muscle growth and then muscles getting stronger. So that doesn't marry up with what you just said, I don't think. So what would you say to those types of things, those types of ideas, I suppose?
Right. Well, it's hard for me to imagine that single set to failure in any one body part or muscle group is going to be inferior than twice a week. I totally believe that nobody has to do that every day, and that it probably won't be better. And I agree that you'll be tired, and if you the very next day tried to test a 1 rep max, you'll probably do worse. But after a rest period, if you compared single set daily to 2 or 3 a week, it's hard for me to believe that would be inferior after a well-designed rest period, because you're still not talking about a huge volume of exercise. I mean, even doing lighter weight, longer time under load, you're still only talking about a couple of minutes. I just don't. I see people who do huge volumes of other kinds of exercise. Like I see guys training for an Ironman triathlon, and they're overtrained. I mean, their cortisol is through the roof. I've seen guys with their testosterone under 100 just from training for an Ironman. I mean, it's literally just going to crush you. You're literally going to be in horrible shape. But single set high intensity training, while it does, make you weaker afterwards, I just don't know that after a rest period, you're going to be permanently weaker than if you trained, once a week versus once a day. I mean, maybe the research out there exists to prove me wrong, and I would love to see it. That's possible.
Cool. So if I'm interested now, because there's definitely times where I'm like, I feel good today. I feel like I could do a workout, but then I'm like, no, I shouldn't, because I need more recovery, which could be complete bullshit. So I guess what would be useful to know then is if one were to start some kind of program where they're training single set to failure almost daily or every other day. What you mentioned some there, testosterone, one of those, and what metrics would be useful to track to make sure you're not overtraining, or KPIs, I should say?
Well, in terms of blood tests, there's very little that's going to be of any value either way, but you will see testosterone go way down if your overall exercise volume is too high.
Okay.
But it's almost more important how you feel, in my opinion. I mean, because people are just not going to feel great.
Yeah. Be interested to know your thoughts. How long have you been into this type of training? What's your exercise journey been exactly?
Oh, right. Okay, so, back when I was a vegetarian, I was a distance runner. So I've run a number of half marathons and, that sort of thing. And my body composition was just horrible. I was skinny fat. I felt like crap. I had all these running injuries. It was a nightmare. Now I'm definitely all about the resistance training, first and foremost. And I've really only been doing that for, less than a decade. So I've been geeked out on the diet part way longer. And so I'm really not any kind of exercise expert at all, right? So, my specialty is diet and metabolism, but I have been kind of geeked out on the exercise thing for 5 or 6 years. And my journey is a little bit weird because I'm trying to democratize all this exercise, right? I want to dumb it way down so that everybody can jump on board. And I'm like, you don't have to overthink all this. You don't have to have the perfect routine and the perfect gym and the perfect equipment. I'm like, why don't you just get on the ground right freaking now and do a set of push-ups to failure? You'd be so much better off. You know what I mean? So I want to lower the bar to entry to exercise. I'm like, how can you do it when you have no time, no equipment, no anything? What's the very absolute bare minimum you need to get into some sort of resistance training? How can we make that bar as low as possible so you can start it like right now, not tomorrow or next month, but this very second you need some sort of resistance exercise. And so my focus has been on making it really accessible and really basic and really easy. And that's part of what drew me into high intensity training, because it's not a huge time suck the way a lot of conventional exercise is, and it's really dovetails well with the diet message for me, because when it comes to diet, in my opinion, it's what you eat that's a million times more important than how much you eat, which is just dumb, right? You should be able to eat intuitively. As long as you're eating the right foods, how much doesn't matter. Well, it's kind of the same way with exercise, right? It's about what you're doing for exercise, not how much exercise you're doing. The conventional thinking is it's all about, running an hour a day. Nope. It's what you're doing, not how much. And so high intensity exercise dovetails really nicely with that message for me. And so I want people to exercise intuitively. It's like you focus on the muscle, you work it to failure, and it doesn't so much matter what equipment you had or exactly what you were doing. It's all about the quality of the movement and the intuitive part of the exercise. You know what I mean? That's what appeals to me about high intensity exercise.
Interesting. So I was just thinking, with you being, like you say, type 1 muscle fiber predominantly, and, from your reaction, it sounds like you're like myself in some ways, in that you're like, no, I wish I could gain even more muscle mass, right?
Right.
And I'm assuming that's mostly ego-driven, not necessarily health span related. Is that fair to say?
Well, it's definitely both. You know what I mean? And so I have all these elderly patients, and they can barely move around. They just struggle to move their body through space. And I just never want to be in that situation. I always want to be really good at moving my body through space. You know what I mean? And that's part of the reason I focus on body weight, because I want to be doing these body weight moves when I'm, 90, definitely.
Yeah. But I was wondering, do you, obviously you eat obviously you do the intermittent fasting. So, and it sounds like I'm assuming you don't track calories, you just kind of eat until you're satisfied and move on. But did you ever go through a period of your life where you were slightly more obsessive with, okay, how can I improve my gains, marginally? Do I need to track calories or increase my caloric intake? Did you ever go through a phase like that at all, where you were more obsessed with that
absolutely stuff? Oh yeah, I used to track calories and macros and all sorts of stuff, and I think in the end it ended up not being super value added for me, and I really don't recommend that much tracking for my patients. You know what I mean?
So but
I have done it.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
I have done it just from an interest point of view.
Yeah, because I wonder how much you. I'm kind of the belief that, based on what I've, read and learned, and certainly the guys I've had on this podcast have really influenced my thoughts on this. But that actually, if you're eating enough calories to meet your requirements, so your maintenance level calories, and then you were to maybe increase that by a very small margin, and as soon as you start gaining body fat, then you drop it down again. That's really the best way you're going to optimize for any muscular gain, if any. And maybe that's even too obsessive to think like that, but do you have any thoughts on that? Do you agree with that kind of way of approaching, dietary changes to grow more muscle mass?
Well, I think it's totally mythical that you have to eat more calories in order to add more muscle. I mean, because I have patients doing this amazing recomp where their calories are going down, but they're adding muscle and burning fat at the same time. And we have tons of studies that prove that you can completely recomp this way. And the bottom line is, if the if your body thinks it needs more muscle to stay alive, and you have enough protein available, you're going to add more muscle. I mean, you could take a child and give them growth hormone, and they will get taller even if their calories are low. They're going to be thin as hell, But they will grow, and you could give someone testosterone even though their calories are low, and they will literally add lean mass. And so if the stimulus is there, the body always finds what it needs to do whatever it has to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the idea that, okay, today I have to intentionally be in a 300 calorie surplus just to make sure I'm going to grow any muscle at all, I think that's ridiculous. I mean, your body's going to grow muscle if it thinks it has to survive, even if it has to scavenge that from your adipose or whatever, wherever it has to get it. So, I mean, while I do think it's smart to eat adequate protein and reasonably adequate calories if you're trying to maximize hypertrophy, I don't think you have to be in some sort of huge caloric surplus just as an insurance policy to grow muscle. And I think dirty bulking, these guys who just eat tons of calories, I think that's just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very good for health span from what I've read.
No. Yeah, definitely not.
And you feel like crap as well, because I've done that. It's not a nice experience.
Right.
And I'm really glad to hear that, because I can kind of go, I don't have to worry about all this crap anymore. So
exactly.
And I'm certainly more on your wavelength with that. I'm more about health span. I'm more about wanting to optimize my health so that I have quality of life for as long as I can have it, for sure. And when you focus on that, you do end up optimizing your body composition anyway.
That's right.
So let's talk about your current workout regimen. I mean, what does it look like at the moment?
Well, okay, this is embarrassing, but I've literally never touched a barbell. I'm probably the only person on your podcast who's never touched a barbell in any way. So it's really mostly just body weight moves. I love dips and pull-ups. These are like my favorite exercises on the planet. So it's lots of pull-ups, it's lots of dips, it's lots of push-up variations. I'm mostly doing body weight, and I'm progressing towards single limb movements. So one arm push up, one arm pull up,
really,
single leg squat. That's kind of the way you head to make it more and more challenging. You know what I mean? So you can get a higher weight factor, basically.
I meant to ask you just now, actually. So I guess summarizing what is required for maximum gains, would it be fair to say that so long as a volume and this intensity, so you're training to failure, that is ultimately the most important thing, in your opinion, for maximum results in terms of muscular hypertrophy, would you say?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the only way your body is going to make more muscle is if you communicate to your body that it sucks the way it is and you're going to die unless you have more muscle, literally. So you have to send this message to your body that the next time this weight comes along, we're going to die. And you have to create this transient crisis in your body where you've communicated to it that it has to be better somehow, and only then is it going to change. And I think the muscle mass is all about the stimulus from the resistance training, and it has very, very little to do with diet. And on the flip side, I think the same is true with fat mass. It's mostly about the diet and not as much about the training. You know what I mean?
Just a thought. You mentioned there about how you are an organism and you have to present a life-threatening stimulus to it for it to adapt. This I've heard, obviously, from Dr. Doug McGuff, from Drew Bay, from tons of people in the high-intensity training community. And I wonder, where does that come from? Like, where does that analogy come from? Do you happen to know?
Oh, boy. No, I really don't.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Great way of explaining it, but I always wondered, who came up with that?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and it's actually true. So maybe multiple people at the same time, but I'm not really sure.
Cool.
Who was the first person to come up with that?
Yeah, who knows? If anyone does know that, please do leave a message in the comments. So, you were talking about your workout, and I saw you do some diamond push-ups the other day, actually. I think it was on Twitter or Instagram, one of those. And just curious, why the interest in varying your push-up style? Because it was my understanding that so long as you're doing a standard push-up to failure, you know, are there any additional upsides to actually training those other push-up styles?
Oh, right. Okay. So a diamond push-up is part of a progression to get to a one-arm push-up. If you look at where you have to position your one arm, it's really right in the center of your chest for balance. So as you're working to a one arm, you want to do diamond push-ups. And I think it's valuable to work up to these single limb body weight movements, because it's just a much heavier weight and you get a lower rep range. And I think it's good to work the rep range there. I usually start out by doing a few of the hardest moves, which would be a single arm or single leg, pistol squat, one arm push up, one arm chin. And then typically after I hit failure on that, then I'll sort of do a reverse pyramid down to just a standard or an easier push-up variation, and then hit failure on that after I've done like a pre-exhaust with a single limb movement, basically.
One arm pull-up is something I've never been able to do. How do you progress to do something like that?
Well, you basically start with just obviously a regular two-hand pull-up, and then you start using just 4 fingers or 3 fingers or 2 fingers or 1 finger on the other hand, or you start putting your right hand way off to the side of the bar, so you're mostly using your left hand. Your left hand's directly above your head and your right hand's way off to one side, or vice versa. Those are like a typewriter pull-up kind of thing. And then eventually you get to the point where you just tie a towel or a rope on the bar, and you pull up with one hand, and the other hand is on this rope or towel, a foot or 2 below the bar, so you can't get as much strength from that limb. And you just sort of work your way up to it. It takes forever. It's like ridiculously hard.
What's your goal in doing this? Is it more of keeping it exciting and interesting for you, or do you think that you're going to get improvements in muscle mass and other things by doing that?
I think there are some improvements when you get a lower rep range with a higher weight, and that when it comes to body weight, you can only achieve that by going to single limb movements. So I do think that's valuable.
What improvements do you mean?
Hopefully strength and hypertrophy.
Cool, I thought so, but just to clarify. Cool. Okay. So, what's your current? I'm sorry if you mentioned this already, and I might have missed it. But what is your current training frequency?
Well, okay. So, I literally aim to do a single set to failure daily. That's my goal. But there are plenty of days that I don't have time, or I'm doing way too much running around, or I just don't feel good, and then I might skip it. So, let's say I aim for every day, and I get 4 or 5 in a week. And that's part of what makes me sad about people who are like, they have a day when they could train, they feel pretty good, they have the time, but then they're like, okay, I'm literally not going to do it today because I need to recover more.
Interesting. So
you know what I mean?
Yeah, so when you say you'll do a single set every day if you could, or 4 or 5 times a week, how many exercises? Would that be your whole routine, or would that be a small number of exercises, or just a one exercise? How much volume is that?
That would be basically a full body single set, but that's not too many exercises when it comes to body weight. It would be some sort of pull-up variations, some sort of push-up variations, and some sort of squatting variations like pistol squats or shrimp squats, something like that. So
I can imagine a workout probably lasts 5 to 10 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, it's basically 10 minutes, and right.
Do you track performance? So do you track time under load or reps or anything like that?
Well, okay, I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, right? There are so many people who they're like, you have to record everything and you have to write it down or you'll never improve. You have to count exactly how many reps and how many, what weight. And you can't do any of that with body weight. You really just have to be purely intuitive about the whole thing. But honestly, even the few times in the past where I've done like a machine circuit workouts, there are days where I feel better or I feel stronger or I get a few extra, I can lift heavier or a few more. And then there are other days where I can't. And I just don't know how much value that all that micro tracking really is if you're mostly focusing on the quality of the movement and the feeling in your muscles. You know what I mean? So I almost feel like I could go to the gym and do a machine circuit and use pretty much any weight or a number of reps as long as I'm focusing on this feeling in my muscles. I don't see how it's really going to make a huge, big difference. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. And, it's interesting because I think Dr. James Steele, who I've had on the podcast a couple of times, trains in a very, very similar way. So he'll do all body weight and he won't track his time under load. And instead we'll do these incredibly long sets to failure, which are quite inspiring, to say the least. I don't know if you've seen his HIIT. Have you seen his HIIT workout on YouTube?
Oh, sure. Yeah. It actually reminds me a little bit of mine. Yeah, absolutely.
Have you recorded something like that? Have you doing a full workout?
No, I really haven't. I mean, just little bits here and there. But I probably should do something similar. It would honestly look a lot like James's workout.
Okay, cool. That'd be really interesting to see if you find the time. What's your thoughts on fasting around your workout? So, Art Devaney was saying recently that he fasts, I think, not before, but I think after his workout. And I know Dr. Doug McGuff does as well. And they think that there's some health benefits and possibly performance and muscle hypertrophy benefits in that. What do you think about that? Have you got any thoughts on that at all?
I love fasted workouts, and I'm a huge fan of fasted workouts. And I think that working out in a fasted state is basically a form of metabolic exercise where you're forcing your body to meet all of its metabolic needs with stored body fat. And this is a great route to increased mitochondrial biogenesis and increased mitochondrial density. And anytime you can trigger a transient energy crisis in your cells, they respond by making more mitochondria. So fasted workouts, I think, is spectacular because you're basically challenging your mitochondria the same way you are your muscle fibers. And so I really do try to do most of my workouts in a fasted state. I also think the anabolic window is, way bigger than previously thought. So for me, eating is greatly disconnected from exercise. It's like I'll work out fasted. I don't care if I don't eat right away afterwards, that kind of thing.
Cool. What are your thoughts on, obviously there's this meme floating around about smoking, sitting is the new smoking. A lot of people are moving over to standing desks and that type of thing. Are you standing at the moment? I can't tell.
No, I'm not standing at the moment.
It looks like
I should be. Yeah, I should be. I think sitting is terrible. I do have a standing desk at work. It's permanently in the standing position. Like I literally never sit down at work. As a physician, I've vowed to hand out a note to every employee anywhere who needs a note for a standing desk at work. Like I'm the doctor who's like, do you need a note for your job that says you have to have a standing desk? Because here it is. I just hand those out like candy. And I do agree that sitting is garbage. I mean, everybody sits way too much. This is a disaster for posture.
So posture is one of the issues. My understanding is that it can put a lot of strain on the lower back and it shortens the hip flexors. And also, is it true that it can drop your metabolism quite significantly being sat down? Those are the things I understand why sitting can be detrimental. Is there anything else that you've noticed
Well, I think you've hit all the highlights, but yeah, sitting is bad. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, that's good to know. And this isn't something I was going to ask you, but it's just occurred to me. I'd like to get your opinion on it. I think people that get really into a lot of the health podcasts and a lot of the information on the internet at the moment become quite obsessive with wanting to, track everything, quantified self, this whole thing. For instance, if I'm in a place where the lighting's really bright, I get concerned about how is that going to affect my sleep quality and things like that. And I wonder, how do you manage, being someone who obviously reads a lot of the scientific literature and understands, I guess, what a lot of the things we're exposed to, how they can negatively affect our health. How do you manage that, and how do you look at that type of stuff?
Okay, so there are so many people who I have so many patients who are obsessed with all of this. They've got their supplements lined up. They've got their blue blocker glasses. They've got their circadian everything. They've got, they massively overthink all their exercise. And I really just want to take all these people and just dump them off on a desert island somewhere with like a knife and a loincloth where you have to literally engage in hand-to-hand combat to survive, and you eat just, some wild boar and try not to die. And I think you'd probably get even better outcomes as long as you survived it. You'd probably get a better health and body composition outcome by doing that than all of this other overthinking and stuff. You know what I mean?
So do you not participate in any of this type of stuff? You don't wear blue blockers, stuff like that, or?
I don't do any of that. I mean, I only sleep 5 hours a night with like the TV on, and it's just, I just eat, right before I go to bed late at night. It's just, I think that we're going a little bit overboard in some of that, and I'm not convinced it's, of course, the circadian rhythm is important, and getting sleep is important. But I do think that people spend way too much time overthinking it. And if they spent even a fraction of that time, going outside and doing some push-ups or something like that, they would probably be way better off.
And this leads me on to a question I've been looking forward to ask you, which is, you seem to be, obviously you're a trained doctor, so you understand how to source a lot of high quality information. But I'd be interested, like, where do you get your information, and what websites do you go to for most of your stuff?
Mostly it's the studies. You know what I mean? I like to look at the primary literature and look at the studies because I feel like everything else is prone to, interpretation that I might or might not agree with. So personally, I go straight to the literature, and I like to put my own spin on it and interpret it myself. There are people in the health and fitness space that I really like most of the stuff they're saying, and I think they're nailing it. I'm a big fan of some paleo people like Mark Sisson, who I think has a lot of really great stuff, and he's really dialed in. I'm a low carb proponent, so I like a lot of low carb people as well. But mostly for myself, it's doing the research and looking at the literature on my own.
And that's just PubMed, is it, mostly? Or
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other websites that you frequent that come to mind?
Oh wow.
Don't just say mine.
Right. Oh yeah, it's just yours. No, I'm trying to think. Not really.
Okay. That's good. So you really do go straight to the literature for a lot of your knowledge, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I know people listening are probably like, Lawrence, just read the damn literature, because I often mention how crap I am and lazy I am. But I have, I did read Kevin Hall's study recently that he did with Nusi. The one that was really popular about the high carb versus ketogenic diet.
Right.
And I read a review from, is it Dr. Fung, I want to say?
Okay.
Where he reviewed the study and the reporting that came out of it, and basically suggests that Kevin Hall had a massive confirmation bias in play when he did that study. Are you familiar with this? The one I'm alluding to, or he was just trying to disprove the insulin hypothesis, I think.
I am familiar with that study, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'd be interested. What are your thoughts on that study, if you remember?
I'm trying to remember exactly.
So it was a group of, I think, 17 overweight men who did high carb for 4 weeks, followed immediately by ketogenic diet for 4 weeks.
Right.
Remember the one?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely do remember that. So I had a bunch of problems with this study. First of all, when you do the high carb diet first and it's hypocaloric and you lose weight, you're never going to lose as much weight with the second half of that because you're already in a weight reduced state. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So like if I put you on any diet where you lose a bunch of weight and then I put you on another diet in a weight reduced state, your weight loss is going to immediately slow down or stop entirely because you already lost weight. You know what I mean? So there's a massive bias for whatever weight losing diet you put people on first. They will always do better on that than the follow-up diet because they already lost weight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I had a huge problem with that study because the high carb got to go first and make people lose weight first. They're like, oh, look, you lose weight on this high carb diet and then you switch to low carb and you don't lose as much weight. Well, that's crap because you already lost weight on a high carb diet. You know what I mean?
So really, would you need to do like a crossover design or have a washout period to actually make it better data?
Absolutely. And then there's this whole fad adaptation part, you know what I mean, where if you looked at this study, the people were already losing weight when they went on the high carb part because their initial washout was poorly selected, right? If I remember correctly, they lost a little bit of weight in what was supposed to be a weight neutral part of the diet. And then so these people were already burning some stored body fat, and then they dropped the dietary fat almost to zero. And if you looked at how much fat per day people were losing or burning on the pre-diet versus the high carb diet, it was exactly the same. In other words, their cellular machinery and their mitochondrial energy production didn't have to change at all. They were burning the same amount of fat the whole time. They didn't have to ramp anything up or down. They were doing the exact same thing they were doing. And then you switch it around and put them on this low carb, higher fat diet where they literally have to ramp up the pathways for oxidizing fat in the mitochondria, and that takes some time. And anytime you make the body change metabolism, and the primary substrates, there's going to be a ramp-up period. There's this thing called glucose hysteresis where there's like an inertia to your metabolism. So whatever you've been burning, your body wants to keep burning. So I have you burning X grams of fat per day, and then I suddenly drop dietary fat, you're going to keep burning X grams of fat per day of body fat. But then if I totally switch things up and I take you from a high carb, low fat standard American diet and put you on a high fat, low carb diet, well, you have to retool your system to mostly burn fat. And for a lot of people, that's a long ramp up period of a week or two, or at least, if not 3 or 4, before you're maximally oxidizing fat as a substrate in your mitochondria. So a bunch of things wrong with this study. The lead-in diet was poorly calculated, so they were actually losing weight during that phase. Then switching to high carb, they were still oxidizing the same amount of fat per day, so they didn't have to upgrade anything in their mitochondria. Then you put them on the diet you want to lose because you already put them on the diet where they're losing fat first, you know what I mean? So any second, whatever diet goes second is going to look worse, period. You already lost weight. Now your weight reduced. Now your body's compensating. So there's just a bunch of stuff wrong with this diet.
So you really need to do like a crossover design or to have multiple cohorts, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I honestly, I know what Kevin Hall was trying to do there, and I actually do think that the ultra simplistic carbohydrate insulin theory is kind of wrong. So, I know he has a point to make that I don't entirely disagree with, and his study was interesting. But to say it just, completely destroyed carbohydrates as fueling obesity is ridiculous.
Yeah, good answer. Okay, cool. So just wanted to finish up on some bonus questions. If you still got some time, Ted, I appreciate you. All right for some time still, or do you need?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, cool. Okay. I've got someone cooking me dinner, so hopefully they don't shout at me in a second. As you know, I'm living in Ireland at the moment, and it's likely to be quite high in potatoes. So
right on.
Right. So. Okay, so a few bonus questions. Is there anything that you believe to be true but you can't prove it? I guess in health and fitness to keep it relevant.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, so, all right, if you look at anyone who is doing poorly metabolically, what they all have in common is mitochondria. So if you look at people who are obese, insulin resistant, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, any chronic disease you can think of, the problem is mitochondrial. They have fewer mitochondria, lower mitochondrial density. They literally have funny looking mitochondria. They have weird mitochondrial morphology. They have lower mitochondrial content. They have lower mitochondrial function. If you measure how much fat oxidation they're performing in the mitochondria, it's low. So basically their mitochondria are broken. And I have this theory that you permanently damage mitochondria by dumping glucose and fat on them at the same time, right? And we think that's true. There's this glucose toxicity theory at the mitochondrial level in the electron transport chain. Like, if you have all this fat hitting mitochondria because you can't keep it in your adipocytes, and you dump a bunch of glucose in on top of that, and your body just absolutely has to get rid of both of them. But fat and glucose are usually burned reciprocally in the mitochondria. I have this theory that you get this permanent mitochondrial damage from glucose toxicity of exogenous glucose on top of fat, and your body has to get rid of it and can't put it anywhere, and that you break your mitochondria that way. But I can't really prove that at this time.
What book have you gifted or recommend the most? I suppose again, health and fitness.
Well, I love Body by Science. I love Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes. I love The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living by Drs. Volek and Finney. Probably one of those three, I would say.
Cool, good stuff. What change in your life or behavioural modification are you most proud of in the last year or recent memory? And which habits are you trying to change now, if any?
Most proud. Oh, well, I finally got a muscle up, which I'm pretty proud of. That's like this. It's taken me years to do that. I mean, that's just it's embarrassing how long it took me, but that's something I'm proud of. What I'm trying to do at the moment is just not buy anything. You know what I mean? So like, I've realized that I used to just buy a bunch of crap that I didn't really need, and it was just slowing me down. And so my whole goal right now is just not buying anything. I've realized that people who are financially successful, if you look at millionaires and billionaires, they are not buying stuff. They will drive their car into the ground instead of buying a new one. And they have all these habits of just not buying stuff and saving their money. And I'm like, wow, I really don't have to buy half the crap I used to buy that was just pointless. I could actually just save some money. You know what I mean? So that's my new change right now at the moment.
Can you give us an example of something that you saw recently that you thought, I really want to buy that, but then you realized that it's probably not going to add any value or make you any happier, and then you decided not to?
How about a $30 fidget spinner that I saw on Facebook? You know,
What's
I'm like,
spinner?
It's this little thing that spins around and you play with it when you have ADD or whatever. You know, it's like a little, just Google it. It's like a little spinny thing. This is the latest craze on YouTube and Facebook, and and then I'm like, well, in the past I might have just impulse bought something like that only to throw it out a couple months later, and now I'm like, you know what, I'm just not going to buy anything I don't absolutely need. And wow, you can really save some money that way. I mean, it sounds stupid, but it's pretty powerful.
I completely agree. I love this stuff. I don't know if you heard Tim Ferriss's podcast with Mr. Money Mustache, or if you're familiar with his work. He's created this sort of cult following of people that are obsessed with living on very, very low income and being very minimalist in their lifestyle and their choices. And certainly moving country has made this very attractive to me because, as you can imagine, I'm sort of having to ship stuff over. And I in retrospect, I'm thinking about the stuff I've shipped over, which is currently in a different city. And I'm thinking, I could have just been that. Like, I don't actually need it, and it's just created more hassle than it's worth. So I'm totally on board with that type of approach to life. It just makes sense.
And for me, the body weight training kind of dovetails with that sort of stoicism as well. It's like, wow, you don't really need a bunch of crap.
Completely, yeah. And I do find myself missing Med-X and Nautilus machines quite a lot. Have you? I'm assuming you've used those machines before, have you? You said
I have, yeah. Just very briefly, but I'm familiar with them, yeah. Okay.
So, but I keep trying to remind myself that if I can really master this body weight stuff, which I'm fairly good at in terms of chin-ups and stuff like that, that it would be a very valuable thing to have. So I keep trying to remind myself of that. So I guess this is slightly different, but best investment of time, energy, or money that you've ever made?
Oh, wow. I mean, probably just installing a pull-up bar in my house. You know what I mean? It doesn't cost very much, takes very little time, and then you're just going to get tons of training out of it. It's probably the highest bang for the buck health thing I've ever encountered. The other one would be just learning how to cook on YouTube, right? So like I spend 5 minutes on YouTube, and then I can make restaurant quality crispy salmon or an omelet or braised short ribs or something crazy delicious that I can cook over and over again and eat the rest of my life. And so I've spent this tiny time investment and no money learning how to cook stuff on YouTube, and it's just paid off like unbelievably. I can't think of anything else that would be higher reward or higher payoff than that.
I love that. I saw your meatloaf that you were making for lunches, and I was salivating.
Right.
I'm once my girlfriend and I settled in Galway, which is the plan. I'm looking forward to having a routine of where I can pre-make my lunches like that. That's really quite exciting. Quite sad like that, but And lastly, what have you changed your mind about in health and fitness in the last year? Or recent memory?
I used to think that vegans and low-fat people were the absolute enemy of low-carb people, and they were at two opposite ends of the spectrum. And now I realize they're actually on the same team, and they're both opposing a combination of high carb and high fat at the same time. So if you look at the standard American diet, it's very low in protein and it's really high in carbs and fat together, right? It's just sugar and fat, or flour and oil. It's, all our fattening foods, our potato chips, our French fries, our cakes, cookies, pies, muffins, crackers. It's like you've got fat and carbs, refined, concentrated, processed fat and carbs together, protein's low. And this is the makeup of obesogenic rat chow, or any food that's designed to make an animal as fat as possible. And so we literally know that you can make any animal as fat as possible by combining high carb and high fat together, especially refined, processed carbs and fats together, and keep protein low so there's no satiety, and you just eat that all day long, right? Well, the low carb people and the vegan people, they're actually both on the same team. They're both anti-carbs and fat together, right? The vegans are low fat, the low carb are low carb, but they're both kind of prioritizing protein, whether it's plant or animal, and restricting empty, refined, processed carbs and fat. So they're kind of, they really need to try to put their differences aside and kind of get on the same page, you know what I mean? Because all of these groups are opposite the standard American diet in the same way. It's like prioritizing nutrient density and protein, restricting empty, refined, processed, empty calorie carbs or fats, or both.
Yeah, that's a really cool perspective. Do you think it's generally just due to a lack of understanding in both parties that kind of causes this this aggression you see between the different camps? It's just not people not having a complete understanding of the science.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely it, because you can actually have amazing success with either low carb or low fat. And we have studies that compare very low carb and very low fat, and you have equal outcomes in reversing insulin resistance. So then it comes down to, well, what makes more sense from an evolutionary perspective? And for me, it's definitely the low carb side, because carbs are kind of new. You know what I mean? So your hunter-gatherer ancestors, probably came from some far northern latitude where they ate woolly mammoth jerky 9 months out of the year, and they maybe got some nuts and berries for a few weeks in the summertime, and they were not eating a ton of carbs and a ton of plant sugars. And so I like the low carb approach myself. I think it makes a lot more sense through an evolutionary lens, and that works for me. But it's important to acknowledge you can have success either way. And so you really have to know what gets people the very, very thinnest. And we know that from studies on fitness models and bodybuilders and aesthetic athletes, and that is targeting protein and restricting either carbs or fats or both. And we also know what makes animals, including humans, the very fattest, and that is high carb and high fat together, keeping protein and nutrients low so satiety is low. And so, you just combine some empty calorie, sugar, and fat together, you've got obesogenic rodent chow. You want to flip that around, target protein and nutrients, and to get as lean as possible. You know what I mean?
I do. What is is there any ask you've got for the audience or wisdom that you want to leave them with?
Oh, wow. Okay. I encourage people to get way outside of their comfort zone. You know what I mean? If we were all just super comfortable all the time, you would just sit on the couch and never move, and you would only eat glucose-producing carbs because glucose is the easiest for your body to use. So you just eat tons of carbs and sit on the couch, and your health would be destroyed and your body composition would be destroyed. So what you really want to do is push yourself way out of your comfort zone and get used to being uncomfortable and be okay with that. I don't mean every minute of every day, but temporarily. So Intermittent fasting is good. You're pushing out of your comfort zone. You're leaning into that hunger a little bit. It's uncomfortable to tap into stored body fat and just run your body off of that, but you want to lean into that discomfort and experience that. Anything that's going to get you more mitochondria is going to be uncomfortable. Creating transient energy crisis in your cells by like exercising in a fasted state or doing maximum intensity exercise or doing HIIT sessions. Being in a cold environment, a little bit uncomfortably cool, you get, more browning of fat, you get more mitochondrial density. You want to be uncomfortable. You know what I mean? I was kidding when I said I want to dump people off on a deserted island with just a knife and a loincloth, but that's kind of, good for you. Having this discomfort where you're having to push yourself, properly done exercises, it's just downright painful. It's extremely uncomfortable. Eating nothing but protein is really painful. I mean, your body has to really go way out of its way to replenish glycogen from gluconeogenesis. It's a lot of work. Burning fat in your mitochondria is a lot more work than just eating easy energy calories from glucose. You know what I mean? So push yourself into discomfort with carb restriction, with intermittent fasting, with cold environment, with maximum intensity sprints and lifting. Be uncomfortable. Don't break yourself or whatever, but go ahead and make yourself uncomfortable transiently, because on the other side of that, your body's going to be way better.
Awesome advice. And for all those listening, to get the show notes and listen to the episode and see the links for this episode and all episodes, please go to 15minutecorporatewarrior.com/podcast. Ted, I really enjoyed this, and thank you for taking an enormous amount of time out of your day. Because I've learned a ton, and I think I'm going to do high intensity training every day now.
That sounds great.
That's a joke, obviously. But
thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
No, you're welcome, Ted, and looking forward to getting this one live. I'm really excited, and maybe in the future we'll do a part 2. But wish you all the best with all of your projects and endeavours, and looking forward to see what you come out of in the future as well.
Awesome. Thanks. Have fun in Ireland.
This podcast is brought to you by HitUni.com. HitUni are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carson, and trainer Drew Bay. It was founded by my friend, author and longtime personal trainer Simon Shawcross. Simon has 15 years experience training clients and has supervised over 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skylar Tanner, Dr. James Steele, and Dr. Ellington Darden, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high-intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, and the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organised into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention that there is a DIY course. So this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high-intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regimen. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's hituni.com, and enter the coupon code CW10. That's CW and the number 10. So again, that's hituni.com, pick your course, and enter the coupon code CW10. Thank you for your support.